Hey, drop.
Welcome to AI-FISEC today, the pulse of innovation where the digital frontier meets physical security. I'm your host, Don Marone, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this electrifying journey through the world of AI and physical security. We're here today to dive deep into the heart of innovation, exploring cutting-edge ideas and breakthrough technologies that are reshaping the way we protect our physical spaces. So whether you're a tech enthusiast, a security professional, or just fascinated by the transformative power of AI, you're in the right place. Get ready to be inspired by our industry experts who are here to share their passion, their projects, and their unique insights into the future of security. Fasten your seatbelts and let's embark on this thrilling adventure together on AI-FISEC today. Today's guest is Daniel Reichman. He is the Chief Executive Officer and the Co-Founder of Ai-RGUS. And the topic of discussion is Upskill with AI. You know, I talked to Daniel right before when we were briefing on the podcast. And one of the things that we talked about is before we even talk about getting better with AI or upskilling with AI, we need to first understand what AI is on a most basic sense. I think this is a great place to start before we start to say, how do we upskill next? So, hey, Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Don, thanks for having me.
Before we go into the topic, I'd like for you to at least tell the audience a bit about your background.
So a bit about my background. So I did all my education is in electrical engineering, and my Ph.D. is in artificial intelligence. And actually, the reason I got into all of this was by mistake. I wanted to do math. My parents said, no, you have to do something that you can get a job after college immediately, so that we settled on engineering. I did electrical engineering because it has the most math. So we were both kind of happy. And one of my professors, he did his PhD in artificial intelligence. And I already liked to code because my dad liked to code. So I got into it. And so I took a bunch of coding classes. And the way that he talked about it, this was probably in 2010, 2011, that if you're programming and you're not doing AI, you're really missing out on the future. And it really, I took a class and the first class I took was actually on natural language processing. I think the very first thing we did was classifying news articles in terms of their topic. So is this news article an international news, or is this about sports? I thought that was really cool that you can actually see what the computer is doing and telling you just based on reading the data. I thought that was pretty cool. And so that kind of got me into it. And for my PhD, I worked with the U.S. military on landmine detection. In conflict zones, they put these mines underground, and then someone they're driving over it or walking, it could be really bad if they have no way of knowing what it is. So we worked on the truck, and you might have seen in movies like the mine detectors, they beep sometimes, ideally at the right time. And so our work was on making sure that it beeps when it should. And that gave me a great insight into image processing because it's kind of a quirky problem. It's very different from natural image processing. And so I learned a lot about this stuff. I thought was quite interesting. And right at the end of my PhD, the chief information officer at Duke, she came to my lab and asked if we can develop something for her. Duke has approximately 2,000 cameras on campus. And they had someone whose job it was to every day log into the entire camera system and go one by one and check, is the camera looking where it's supposed to? Did someone move the camera? Is the camera view blurry? And with 2,000 cameras, they said it took them about 5 hours a day, which is
crazy.
Not 5 hours a day. It's so boring.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot overemphasize how boring this is. But this is their job. And so she asked us if we can do something because there must be a better way. And so our first answer was, are you certain that no one's made this before? And she's like, I wouldn't be talking to you if there was. We're Duke, we can buy whatever. So I guess they were desperate enough, and we developed this thing for them, and they were very happy with it. And so I thought, well, if Duke needs it, probably someone else will need it too. And so that's kind of how the company got started. Sorry, that was maybe a little long, but that's kind of how I got into the industry. And so the product that we sell is about making sure that all parts of your security camera system is working as you'd expect it to.
And then one fun fact about you, so the audience gets to know you a little better.
Yeah, definitely. On the weekends when I can, or it doesn't have to be on the weekends, but I like to go do karaoke.
Okay, so you got some pipes. You're a singer.
Yeah.
So pop, rock, country, disco. I don't even know which one is what's the jam of choice.
Somewhere depends on the mood. Pop, sometimes rock, hard metal, whatever the crowd is feeling.
Nice. Good, man. Good. Well, thank you for that intro. Appreciate it. I think, now would be a good time to talk about baseline, foundational, like what is AI, right? And take us through that process before we get to the main topic of discussion, which is upskill with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're already using the acronym, so the assumption is that everybody's already knows that AI is standing for artificial intelligence. And really today, I mean, you hear about it on the news all the time. It's because it's pretty much become one of these words that are synonymous with the future. And we need some background for why this might be the case. So before I can explain why this is, let me first explain what it is. Let's do that by example. So what are some places where it's used? It's been used in healthcare. It's been used in reading X-rays. It's been used to through that speed up some diagnosis. It's been used for pill counting, where the number of pills that go into a bottle can be counted by some kind of sensor or by a computer program looking at that sensor rather than a person. Another area is automating security, like face lock on your phone. It's been used in banking, investing, real estate, government. I mean, it's been used pretty much in every sector. And in all of these examples, the AI is a computer program that's automating something. In particular, it's automating a decision based on information or data that's being collected. Either it's using some kind of specialized sensor that is collecting data, such as a camera or an X-ray machine. And in other scenarios, it's based on information you give it, such as filling out forms or using your browser even, and for it to make its decisions. So in some limited sense, you can think of AI as automating decisions based on data. Now, if you read the news about AI, you'll be led to believe that AI can automate literally anything, and that in fact it already has automated everything. Now, the reality is a bit more complicated than that. And I'll use as shorthand the word task for the thing that we're trying to automate. And a task can fall on a spectrum of difficulty. And researchers have found a way to break this difficulty down, and they do it according to two dimensions. The first one is how repetitive that action is. So like, how often do you have to do the same thing? Mm-hmm. And then the other axis is how much thinking you need to do each time you're acting. So two axes. And if we think of it that way, we can think of some examples and build our understanding. So the first example I'll talk about is cashing checks. Cashing a check is a pretty standard thing. It's a form. Mm-hmm. The bank prepares it. It tells you, there's some forms. The most difficult thing to do maybe is reading handwriting, but even that, barely anybody's writing their checks anymore. It's all being printed. Mm-hmm. Compare that to a babysitter, or in the security space, let's say a security guard, right? They wake up, they go to their job. Every day could be a new type of incident, and you have to have empathy. You need to be sure that you're acting correctly. If you see someone lying on the floor, it could be because they need help, not because they need it's a security incident. So you have to have some discretion. And so there's a lot more thought and a lot less repetition. And so it shouldn't surprise you that, pretty much every mobile banking app today has some kind of cash checking thing, which, you can automate completely. But a robot security guard hasn't really taken off in that same way ubiquitously. And so it's really important to think about the tasks that make sense to do. And today, what AI is really good at is recognizing things, recognition. And I'll repeat that word a lot as we talk today, because if you can tell a computer, this is what I'm looking for, this is the example that I'm looking for, find it for me, through the magic that is deep learning, it can do that really, really well. And if you can think of your tasks in general, and think about, I I have to recognize certain things in order to do my job better. Though that recognize part, that's not a lot of thought usually, because usually those are things that you can point to. Like in the example of our software, a blurry camera, a tilted camera, it's really boring to look for those. But what's important is, well, how am I going to fix it, right? And this is where the person comes in, and that's the important part of having a person involved in the situation. So
it's like human in the middle.
Yeah, human in the middle, where the AI can assist with the parts that don't require much of that thought that I talked about, and much more of the repetitive part. Because recognition in itself is very repetitive, because you're trying to recognize something. Now, will it do it perfectly? That's a separate issue. Will it miss things? Of course, but so do humans. There is nuance here. Not everything can so easily be recognized, and I don't want to make a blanket statement like anything could be recognized by AI. But there are a lot of things that, especially if you can furnish examples for the thing you're trying to recognize in data, the more precisely you can show examples of the thing you're trying to recognize, the higher odds of success you have for automating it with AI, for using it, and then, well, for you to be able to do your job more efficiently, faster, etc.
I love it. What I heard was, you get positive outcomes when you can furnish examples to the computers that they can recognize, but it starts with looking at like what repetitive tasks exist that there's an opportunity for, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I got that. Cool. Awesome, man. So, as we segue into the topic, how do you see AI transforming the skill set required for professionals in the physical security industry? Let's say in any amount of time frame that you want. It could be 1 year, 5 years. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think the first thing we can try to do is analogize it to a time right before computers, or the word processors, the Excel type revolution, where you have this tool that otherwise you'd have to do these things by hand. I mean, actually, let's start even sooner. You've got the typewriter to the computer. The typewriter is nice because you don't have the problems of illegible handwriting, but you don't have a backspace, right? That's a really big deal with backspace. The computer did. And then you have the search functionality that comes with it. So it's because you kind of have to get out of that mindset of, I have to be able to type every single word correctly. It's okay for me to type 80 words a minute and make a bunch of mistakes, because the spell check will fix it. And that's probably faster than me looking at every key on the keyboard, right? The Control F, like remembering to do that rather than scrolling through your document or leafing through it, important. And so, so if we move from Word now to Excel, it's about, well, are you familiar with all the ways that you can organize data in Excel? Because you can make a whole big mess of it. It really is a blank canvas. But if you do it right, if you set up some formulas, even if you do some coloring, you can do some conditional formatting, pivot tables, freezing the top row, things like that, all make it much easier for you to analyze the massive data that you probably have if you're using something like Excel. And then it further evolves into using a database. So it's really about knowing what it makes sense to do manually versus knowing what makes sense to do with some help or a tool. Because even Excel, it has its limitations. Like at the end, at some point, you get stuck with hundreds of spreadsheets and nested formulas and things like that. You don't want that. Sometimes more specialized software that's very dedicated to the problem and the workflow that you are trying to do makes sense to purchase, because, well, it's a big part of your job. And so all that to say, today there's a new tool on the scene, and that's the automation that comes with AI. And of course, if you've read the news, you've certainly heard of ChatGPT, but even before ChatGPT and the LLMs and the chatbots that they're pretty controversial, but there's a lot there, so we'll get to it. But even just the AI that isn't the generative AI, so just the usual AI that I was talking about, the recognition, finding tools that can recognize something for you is already going to be a big helpful thing. I mean, in cybersecurity, a lot of the what they call next generation type software are software that sift through logs and find events that if you, the human, had to sift through all those logs, would have so much trouble finding it. And they can correlate a lot of logs. It could be complicated events, like there is this one IP address that every 5 minutes is trying to do something. Why is it doing it every 5 minutes? Because it's exactly trying to evade human notice, right? Now, why would it do something like that? One example that comes to mind is called port knocking. Port knocking is something you try to do to break a firewall, where you try to see which protocol is what ports are open, and maybe if I knock on a certain sequence, I can try and open the firewall in a way. So all sorts of things that people might try to do that you as a person you wouldn't be able to notice, but the AI that's automating it, even if it's something somewhat simple like a rule-based engine that says, I'm going to list you all the IP addresses that are making attempts in some kind of regular fashion, like every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. I'll give you a list of that. Even if it's just automating a simple task like that with rules that you set up, that's already better. And it's running automatically. It's already better than you trying to do it yourself. So anything that you can, I think the big transition today in terms of upskilling with AI is recognizing that whenever you're trying to do something that you're doing repetitively, or that is repetitive but requires a little bit of nuance in terms of how you would capture that event, that's ripe for automation with AI. And I'm not going to guarantee this, but I would wager and say that probably someone has built some kind of software that can automate that task for you.
Yeah, it's like a new AI company pops up every day.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
They have and even hundreds, thousands of LLMs. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
So, you make a good point, right? Because someone to inch their way into this as a physical security professional in the industry that wants to upskill with AI, sounds like the first step is to recognize the repetitive, and then finding ways that they can automate that or make that more simple in their life, right? Yeah. And that seems like that, in the most basic sense, is what AI accomplishes for the individual and for the company. What have you seen as, maybe you have some examples of that, right? Of what that looks like in this space, right? Meaning, does a customer, they want to go on that journey to say, okay, I can see them spending a lot of time clearing alarms, right? And that's extremely repetitive, and I've recognized that. So now my next step is ...
Right.
What happens next with them?
Yeah, definitely. So the concept of false alarms or removing alarms, etc., there's a lot to say about it. It's complicated because you have to think about the types of alarms that you consider nuisance,
mm-hmm.
or really, what are the alarms that you really care about? And in security, I mean, to a certain extent, these things are somewhat obvious. You're always kind of looking for a person, you're looking for a vehicle where it shouldn't be, or a vehicle where it should
mm-hmm.
be, just going in the wrong direction, or, there are certain types of event. You're trying to read a license plate, you're trying to recognize a face maybe. So the first step is spelling out what are the things that I'm looking for. And then starting from there. Thinking about all the things that you don't care about, I think, is more challenging because you might not recognize or realize that.
Or really care to admit the things you don't care about, right?
Complicated.
I care about,
Well, one example I was going to say is if you have, you might not remember that, or might not realize that spider webs are a problem on cameras, especially ones that have infrared. And so you might not, if you go to your vendor and say, hey, I'm looking for a way to detect people, you might not realize I should also be careful that they know that there are spider webs and that they're still able to recognize people, or at least let you know, hey, there's a spider web on this camera. Someone should go out and clean it, right? So start by saying these are the types of alarms that I am interested in recognizing, because there is also a whole buffet of options these days in terms of recognition. Like, would you care to get an alert that says someone is loitering? Would you care about having an alert that tells you that a car is driving the wrong direction? So it's really about finding the vendor that can let you choose the things you care about and not burden you with, well, probably a higher price and just a lot more recognition than you might need. Because even among the things that you care about, there could be a considerable amount of noise. So let's just start with that. But there's a lot of opportunity for alerts, both from an end user point of view and from a system integrator point of view. Because for an end user, a lot of the times it's about security, but there's also a lot of other things you can do with your data. Like, you have cameras at doorways. Well, that is an opportunity to know how many people are going through that door. Your occupancy. Someone recently mentioned to me the idea of, more from a sustainability point of view, is the door open or not, for heating and cooling purposes. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can use that data. You have eyes everywhere through your cameras. And from a managed service provider's perspective, any alarm is an opportunity, because either it's an opportunity to provide better security to your end user, because, well, you could be the one who is making sure that the police is coming, or whoever the security guard is notified for it. And if it's an alert that's a false alarm, and it's either because the camera was malfunctioning or because there was some kind of, let's say, leaves are blowing, you might say that's a nuisance, right? But it could also be that you've got a tree nearby that someone should cut, and then you wouldn't have that problem because that tree could cause other issues. I don't know. It depends on the specific case, but there's a lot of opportunity in handling alarms for your end user, whether they might think it's a nuisance or not. How you look at that data could be entirely different than someone else.
So let's take a step back on the education. So I feel like there's like a couple areas in upskilling. Like, one is you're an educated guy, right? And there's that base of, like, I have a academic background of base knowledge, and then expanding on that and practicality in the industry, right? A lot of these folks, they might have to be forced to expand on practicality in the industry, but I do wonder, how much is up as education, formal education, right? And you can think of it as Coursera or something online. It doesn't have to be like a PhD, right? It could be just a certificate or something. Is important for physical security professionals to get or to learn as a basis of upskilling themselves. And there's actually, it's funny because I think someone in my network had posted about this, and they asked, like, how, actually just today, and they posted a thought-provoking question around, are companies hiring more people with AI, or they are more physical security industry experience? What are they valuing more? Like, are they seeing a trend in either way, right? And I think that's interesting, because it's like, okay, well, if you're an existing physical security person that's probably listening to this podcast, you might not be an AI person, right? An AI person. Like, Daniel, you're an AI person. You have a formal education. Like, it is no question about it. You have an expertise in the domain based on those credentials, right? But how does one person, like, do you find that, what I'm saying is, do you find that it's valuable to get a formal education at all for physical security experts? Or do you think just the practicality of being in the domain is enough? Because I feel like one day if they wake up and they just say, well, my AI will automate my stuff, why am I here? What value do I bring? But they don't know how this stuff works or how it could expand, right? They can't expand their knowledge because they don't understand baseline things, And so it's just something I think about, but let's get back to that. So the question is, how important is a formal education around upskilling with AI?
This is a very complicated question. I think it really depends on the job title you're looking to have. And let's start at the end. Mm-hmm. If you're a customer of an AI company, by and large, you're not developing new AI. At best, maybe there's some vendors, but at best, they are giving you tools that you can piece together, maybe in some customized alerts or something like that. But unless you literally want, they're all pretty much black box systems that you are consuming their information. So unless you're going to be interested in being a developer at such a company, having that level of knowledge and learning the math and statistics behind it and learning to be a programmer and etc., like it might be a bit overkill. But I think that there's a lot of literacy that is helpful, or some baseline level of literacy that is helpful. A lot in for two reasons. One, just due diligence reasons. Like anybody can tell you, oh yeah, I'm a new vendor in AI. How do you know that this person is going to be, that the demo you're seeing isn't going to be vaporware? How do you know that, okay, you might run it on 10 cameras, but once you deploy it in reality and you're doing it on 100 or 1,000 cameras, will it still work or not? And an important part of the literacy that I'm mentioning is just having some rules of thumb for, do I believe that one, this problem can even be solved with AI? And two, is this vendor reputable or believable in their claims of doing that? And I think that's one big reason why it's important to learn about AI, especially these products are going to keep popping up and they will continue to be, considered in the running for new purchases. So I think just for that reason, it's important. And then from the sales and marketing perspective, I think it will help you speak better about it. I mean, I guess you can use ChatGPT to write something, but even ChatGPT doesn't really, doesn't do great with the specifics or like really understanding a topic. So this is where, you can really bring insight to and become a valuable resource to your prospect, where you can help them better understand either why your company is uniquely positioned to sell this, why do you need AI to solve this, and maybe even explain, like, because there's always edge cases and things that the customer will ask about. And the more you understand and you can think like an AI thinks, the easier it will be for you to explain what's going on.
Yeah, because some of the reality is who interfaces with the customer mostly that's making these decisions. It's not engineers today, by and large, in the industry. Normally, it's consultants, it's manufacturers, it's integrators, right? And so whatever their position is, a GM, whatever, a consulting manager, something, they know a lot about electronics and voltage. But then when it comes to this space, and to your point, when I'm meeting with an enterprise company and they're like, hey, what's the back end of this? What are, if I want to host it my own, what's that setup look like? How many GPUs do I need? It's not an NVR anymore. I mean, I think it would be, right? If you get down to small language model, I'm talking LLMs, right? Deep learning, this is already happening, but I'm thinking more of a sense of what's to come, and the specifications of those things will change. So I feel like people have to figure it out to some degree. But to your point, it's a great point that it very much depends on the role. And one of the things too about when you mentioned engineers is, they've been using the GitHub Copilot for a while. And when more engineers have used that, the more they become comfortable of using this as a tool to help them speed up their code and the code development, and now it's like normal. It's almost like I need a tool like that. Otherwise, I don't want to sit here and write every line by line code like I did 4 years ago or whatever, 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, whatever it was. And so I think that it seems like it's across the board in most cases, but obviously, to your point, it depends on what the role is. It justifies probably the level. Like if I'm an engineer, I probably need like a formal education. It sounds like that's one part of the spectrum. If I'm a salesperson on the other end of the spectrum, I could probably take, watch maybe 20 hours of YouTube and I might be okay. Right. So obviously depends on who you're selling to too, right? If I'm selling to an enterprise customer, hopefully you're doing more than 20 hours on YouTube. So tell me, what do you think are some of the most critical AI skills that security professionals should focus on when developing to stay relevant? The key word is relevant.
I think first and foremost, awareness of the solutions, knowing what's out there. You can't, you could try and think of things from scratch, but why? There's a lot of smart people who already started working on things. Might as well at least be conversant in what they're trying to do. Also, this is a good starting point because it could kind of show you what people are not working on or what's not yet available. And there's opportunity in that. If you're facing something very custom and no one's worked on that before, well, could be a reason to start a company, could be a reason to find funding for a project. And also, by doing a good vendor search, you can find who might be a good company to potentially partner with on doing that. I think that's always a good starting point, is just seeing what's out there. But the seeing what's out there can quickly lead you, and probably should quickly lead you into, okay, what is AI all about? And those 20 hours on YouTube, or finding some kind of more formal intro type education, I think.
As someone that's educated in this space, just as more of like a short opinion piece, maybe unrelated to the topic, I'm just curious. For someone that's like formally educated in this space, that knows that's built these things, how fascinating, interesting, whatever word you want to use, are conversations when you hear people talk about AI? Because what happens when I've seen in this industry, right? Because what I've heard, and I've gone to shows, that people are like, they say they have AI, they don't really have AI. And I'm thinking, like, do you even know what AI is? Right? Some people just ask, and they're like, they just question it because it's like, it's easy to do that, right? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but have you asked them, like, what's the back end? Like, how is this thing architectured, right? Do you even know how to ask those questions, or are you just asking just the challenge? And so I wonder, from someone that like legitimately knows this space, like, what's been your experience around the interaction in the space and how they take into AI? Do you find that what they're saying is true, that like there is a lot of falsehood in what people are calling AI, right? Maybe they were right. Or do you find that, people are doing the right thing for the most part, it seems like, and we're just questioning it to question it, like we've always done in this space?
You might have some specific vendors or claims in mind. And I don't know all the vendors, so it's hard for me to really accuse anybody. But they're definitely, I won't name names of companies here, but a very large company who probably everybody listening to has bought something from in the last month, just came out in the news in the last couple of months that one of their flagship products was actually being powered by humans who are looking at everything and in real time saying, "Hey,
that's crazy.
This is the prediction, or this is what we recognized." And so, it's pervasive. And the reason why I'm starting off with this story is because when you're accusing someone of doing something, you have to ask, well, if they are giving me predictions, how are they doing it? If I have an NVR that's, entirely air-gapped, and it's telling me there's a person there and drawing a box on it, there's no room for a person to be hiding in that NVR. So clearly there's some software that's doing it. And I think by and large, everybody who says that they're doing AI is probably doing AI. Now the question is, are they using a rule-based engine? Are they using more the AI from the 90s and early 2000s? Are they using deep learning? I think that might be more precisely the question that people are getting at, where I think today it's become quite uncontroversial to say that if you're not using deep learning, you're leaving accuracy on the table. So I think that's the first, maybe more precise question to ask is, are they using deep learning or not? Only because it's become synonymous with better performance. And it just is. It just is. You have to trust it. So if you think that they haven't updated their program in, over a decade, then sure, you can ask that question. But any more than that, I think is really splitting hairs, because it's just going to be too hard to tell. And to a large extent, you just have to say, well, do I believe that this problem can be solved? Because, if they say that they can, predict threats, in a month from now, no, that's just, it's too vague. like I said before, the AI wouldn't even know what to look for, except if it's like I'm looking for, a rocket that's coming from outer space that I can, compute its trajectory because that's just physics. Sure. But anything short of that, I just don't know, Next, the other question would be, does this vendor have access to the type of data they're purporting to be recognizing? For example, if someone tells me, I want you to recognize a flame in a factory, I want to make sure that the factory, fire flame is healthy and things aren't burning or there aren't toxic fumes or something like that. I don't own a factory. Why would you believe me? In my story, I told you I worked with Duke University. We worked on their camera system. Like, at what point in my life would I have gotten access to a flame of a factory and be able to film it and see toxic gases? It's going to be difficult for me to convince you that, yeah, I had access to that. Oh, maybe, I should come up with a more convincing story if that's what I want to convince you of, basically. So I think those are the two big things. Like, did this company keep up with trends? Are they hiring for people? Are they hiring people with deep learning expertise or not? That's a big one. And then the other thing is, who are they that they would have worked on this problem?
I love that. We think about topic upskill with AI as a security professional. I think being able to recognize these things you mentioned were really important. I mean, in the past, people would look at information security white papers and understand the cybersecurity posture of a product. And maybe that was a part of the evaluation of the security team. And do customers have a data scientist on board to evaluate whether they're using ML or deep learning? Or do you think they just see the product, it works, and they're like, I'm good?
I think, I'm biased by my experiences. And as you've noted, I went to school for this. And I think I'd like to think we have a pretty convincing story for why we are working on this and where we came from. So I wouldn't say that maybe I'm not eliciting these types of questions or that line of thinking because, again, I apologize.
Because your stuff is good.
We are, honest people. But maybe in different scenarios, it makes more sense. I'm not sure. I think, the bigger the claims, the larger the evidence that's required. And even for our product, which I would say is relatively straightforward to conceptualize. Like, if your camera is tilted, we should tell you. So if you do a trial and you move your camera and the camera's tilted, we'll let you know, right? Now, there's a lot of ways to test this specific condition. And to a large extent, I think it's quite difficult to test whether the vendor actually did the work. And to a large extent, you have to just kind of try it and see how it goes and rely on past experiences. Have you worked in this industry before? Have you seen data that's similar to data that is our campus? Things like that can help alleviate your concerns. Because if I've deployed my solution on outdoor cameras and you have a lot of outdoor cameras, well, it stands and I can get you references from those customers. It stands to reason that my AI was trained on outdoor cameras or, nighttime or whatever the case may be. So I think trying to recognize also how similar are you? How similar is the data that you'll be showing this AI to data it is already currently processing and supposedly doing well on?
Yeah. And to me, that's a skill that a lot of people should thrive to have. Like, how do I evaluate, potential purchases that I'm looking at? How do I evaluate the next consideration from an organization that's out to remove these repetitive tasks? What are the main challenges physical security professionals face when upskilling with AI, and how can these challenges be addressed effectively?
I think one big difference between AI and just software engineering in general is that there's a large math component to this. And usually it's the math that no one really likes, which is probability and statistics, and it's probability and statistics are tricky. It's very hard to hide inside of those statistics. I mean, it's very easy in some sense because you can do it. You can, paint really broad brush strokes and make very false claims very quickly. But the reality is that to understand it, to understand what AI really is, you do need to a certain extent learn some of the math behind it. And I think that's where a lot of people get themselves into trouble because, yeah, sure, anybody could figure out enough to hack something together, go on GitHub, download a model, run it on your data. Sure. And then, you start seeing the mistakes that it makes. And it's like, all right, what now? How do I fix this? And it's not so much about should you try to be the person who knows how to fix this. Like, this is why people spend years getting good at this. This isn't really what I'm pitching, but it's more about understanding why the AI makes the mistakes that it makes and using that as your basis for evaluation. Because one quick example, why was deep learning so important? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, but let me try to boil it down in one way. The AI, to a large extent, is looking at the differences between two things and trying to characterize, are these differences meaningful or not? So if I'm trying to recognize, a dog, in a picture, and you gave me a picture of a cat, in some sense, I'm looking at a difference between, this image of a cat and what I know to be a dog. You want the AI to, let's think of an example. Let's say I give you an image of a dog, an image of a dog, but it's entirely, all the colors are just the red of that color. So it's an image that's just like overwhelmingly red. There's no green and blue. And I compare that to its color image. That's going to be a huge numerical difference, right? And I might say, no, that's not a dog, right? But what deep learning was good at is not just looking at color, but also factoring in the structure of the image and, doing that automatically. There's a lot of details I'm glossing over, but the idea is that it's not distracted by what would otherwise be a very large difference in the image. And I know this is like very mechanical, what I'm talking about, but it is still important. And those kinds of differences, you might say, well, they don't really matter, or no AI would get tripped up by it. But that's not true. It would. And realizing what are the types of things that an AI would get tripped up on is really, I would say, like part 2 of your education. But having some understanding of the statistics behind it could explain to you and drive that knowledge of like, it's making silly mistakes. That's fine. Or no, that's like, it's probably going to keep doing that because it's not recognizing like the inherent concept of a dog. It's just recognizing, general shapes that could be confused with other shapes, So that's kind of where the statistics comes in. And I would say that's first you should do all the other things that I mentioned. But then once you're done, I would say trying to pick up some understanding of the statistics behind the AI and why it's doing what it's doing will be very helpful, again, in trying to evaluate whether a trial is going well or not for your product.
There's a balance of upskilling for the security professionals. Is it too much detail? Is it not enough? Like you said, it depends on the role. I mean, my thing is like, if I'm in an organization and I'm a global security director and I'm using this AI stuff, if I foundationally like know how it works or at least have an idea, then whether something goes right or something goes wrong and I need to explain it to upper leadership, I have that opportunity to do that. Because upper leadership might have a different impression on what it is based on what they saw online. So meaning that if we're versed on it, and like you said, like I think what we're able to do by understanding it is get to a fair assumption that would trigger proper expectations within an organization. Company is going to say like, hey, we're going to buy this thing, but just so you know, it's a statistical model. So it predicts or explains something. And it's going to give you some percentage, never 100%, but as far as it can get. And that can vary based on the environment, especially in video that is so random sometimes, right? Based on so many things. And I think that's important.
This is a really important point. And I have 2 things to say about it. First, when you're hiring, you think about this a lot. You think, I got this person and they're really good at this, but they're not quite so good at that. So the next person that I hire on this team, I'll make sure that they have these qualities. And that concept of compensation is really important. And yeah, the better you understand, the better you can understand how to compensate and how to layer things. Because, and really, like if you go into the purchase of an AI product expecting that it will solve the entire problem, I've got some news for you. Like that's just it's unlikely. Like, it will highlight things for you, and the person will have to use it. But to the extent that it helps the human needs to know what it's not helping it with. And if you're expecting it to do too much, or if you've got a very custom scenario that, that's very specific to your use case, well, it's probably a good thing to ask your vendor, hey, is it going to find this for me? Or do you think that's unlikely? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go forward with it, but at least you should know what things to expect it will find and what things you can expect it won't find, so you can compensate for it. Like in cybersecurity, you don't just have strong passwords. People now also do multi-factor authentication. People do, access-based controls, all these different things to make sure that the data is secured one way or another. And it's in the same way here, layering and understanding where does one tool end and the other tool start, and if there is no overlap, where do I put the person to make sure that there are no gaps? Yeah.
No, thank you for adding to that. You mentioned earlier when people are evaluating companies to say, are they keeping up with the trends, but also are they hiring like talent to show that they're taking AI seriously, or they have the means to even make these things, right? One of the questions I have is, how can organizations support their employees in the process of upskilling AI, and what role do you think continuous education plays in this, right? So when we think in terms of, if I'm upskilling, that means as an existing employee, is it possible to say, I've got a software developer, hey, you're awesome, you've been in the company for 5-10 years, I want to pay you go back to school to upskill you to do this? Or is it more of, hey, you're just going to use the tools that will enable you to do something different, but still we need someone in the organization to deploy these things? There's a big difference between, I know, a data scientist and a software developer, and being able to aggregating data and getting data. So the question again was, how can organizations support their employees in the process of upskilling with AI? And what role do you think continuous education plays in this?
That's a really tough one. I think that one's too complicated for me to answer. It really depends on the employee, the situation, and also how integral to the business AI development is. Like, we are an AI company. We sell an AI product. So we need to have AI people in-house. That's just what it is. But if you're using, that's not like your bread and butter, you might benefit from just using tools that are out there, or identifying a vendor and outsourcing it. Like, it really depends on how fundamental this is to your strategy, and then seeing what's out there for the thing you're trying to do. And in terms of upskilling individual people, I mean, that again really depends on the person. But I think that the programmer specifically is difficult for me to really comment on generally. But I think that in other roles, it's easier, because all the things that I mentioned earlier in this conversation are things that I believe could definitely be picked up by anyone who tries. And I think that it's just something that you need to have a willingness to try, and from the company's perspective, a willingness to try as well, because an employee could be very excited about something, but if they're not given the wiggle room to try a new product, or conceive of a new strategy, then there's not a lot of hope for innovation unless leadership is actively busy with it. So I think making room for the mental space, making room for new ways of doing things, I think is probably the most important, and everything else will kind of emanate from there.
I love it. One of the things I think about this question, because it's a tough question, right? I mean, it's like everything depends. And if I was not to be an AI person, I'm just trying to upskill me, right? And there's jobs, every department that's affected by this. And it could be as simple as a company getting Microsoft Copilot and automating some part of the PowerPoint creation process. And then it could be, like you said, it could be, helping developers, DevOps teams, and, everything else in between. And when we think about the physical security industry and outside, because I think we tend to think of like a lot of things get productized. I feel like in this space, it's not, it's like I need a hardware or software, go to IC West and decide to do that. But there's that, obviously, right? I mean, that is a fundamental thing that's really important to, protect people, property, and assets for sure. But then there's the other side that says, hey, I have a regular job that doesn't maybe exist in a GSOC every day. I send emails, I send messages, and there's ways to, streamline those processes and things that are available to just make them more efficient. What I will say though, and I think that anyone that's probably using ChatGPT, you should stop, because you're pumping your company's information in the public web. And they could, there's other solutions that won't do that. They could probably easily get into, or more easily get into, without putting them in a vulnerable situation. But these are simple things that they can use to upskill. That doesn't necessarily imply they would upskill into an AI person, but just get better at their job. And it gives them back more time to focus on things that are more important. So now, in your opinion, how important is it for security professionals to have a deep understanding of AI technology versus practical application focused knowledge?
I think you jump so deeply into, or so quickly into, the deep end of the pool, or the shallow part of the pool is so small, I should say, that trying to really get deep knowledge of it, I think, is by and large not going to be so productive. It will take so long for you to feel comfortable with the knowledge that you have to be able to say anything at that level. I think just really focusing on the goals of being able to vet what's in front of you and being able to say, yes, this trial is going well, we should buy. I think I think that's a really good goal to have. And from the salesperson point of view, understanding what, common pitfalls of deep learning are well documented at this point, and I think just understanding those and knowing the basics of that, I think will already put you so far ahead. The extra effort of really understanding what's, under the hood. I don't want to say it's a total waste of time. It's always, it can't hurt, but it's just a lot of effort.
Yeah. No, I asked because I think the importance is, while, you can get an education, you can read about it, you can think about it. At the end of the day, don't feel overwhelmed as a security professional that you have to learn the details.
Yeah. And also,
right
at the end of the day, also with this stuff, it's very applied. You have to do it to understand what it is. It's really just by working on a problem, programming, failing at it, being, breaking your head over a problem for a while, that you'll really understand it. And that's true of AI, and it's true of anything else. Experience is important. And I'm just not quite sure that taking a bunch of classes and then calling it a day will even give you the knowledge that you're hoping to get. So having more of higher level understanding of what are the potential problems, what are the things to look for, some rules of thumb, like I shared, of do I believe that this company has the skills? Do I believe that this company would have the expertise or the data, in this case, to have worked on this problem? Do they have they worked in scenarios that are similar to mine? I think just really understanding why those questions are important and why I'm mentioning them, I think it already gives you a very good starting point in terms of how you can evaluate what's in front of you.
I think that was a really concise way of helping any listeners that want to learn more about this to know that it doesn't have to be a daunting task, something that you need to spend a ton of time on, and something that you can just focus on, like, where do I want to be, what's important to me, and then execute in that way. So here's an interesting one. So how do you think adoption of AI in the physical security sector will impact traditional roles, and what new roles do you foresee emerging?
So I think a lot of work right now is grunt work, sifting through data, reconfiguring systems, reprogramming systems. And I think between the push of having more open software, having APIs, things like that, will already move a lot of people from just clicking buttons all day long to looking at the information and doing something about it. It's already happening with remote guarding is one example, where a lot of people are literally just looking at alarms these days and not just looking at the raw video feeds, because it's just so much data. You get tired, you get distracted. It's just not really feasible. So remote guarding is one. Maintenance is another one where, instead of looking at your tool or logging into the VMS to see, are any of the cameras down? Is everything recording? Are my hard drives okay? Having alerts that tell you these are the problems. Like, that's another way that things change. And then you can focus on, well, these cameras are going down because there's a network problem, and the network problem is because the switch that we use doesn't have enough capacity. Maybe we need, that's a level of thinking that, it's going to be hard to have a computer do it. But if you have got a person who's reasonably technical and knows and has all the information at their fingertips, they could solve this. It's a service call for the managed service provider, and it's or the cybersecurity things are today a big thing too, like changing passwords, updating firmware. If you have to log in and do this one by one, it takes an eternity, and people don't end up doing it. So having tools that let you do bulk updates is also helpful. And then, once all that grunt work is out of the way, you can actually focus on doing security. I mean, before computers, everyone was a physical guard, right? You didn't have some kind of automated way of doing it, and that was the concept of security. It's not because we have computers now that the concept of physically securing a place has changed much. We're just using different tools for it. But now there's a lot of distraction because the tools are great, but they're a burden. So I think hopefully over time, having a lot of these, the burdens of the technology go away and letting people get back to actually doing security, I think that's a big thing. And some of the new things, I knew we wouldn't be able to have a conversation without talking about ChatGPT. But to a certain extent, I think the LLMs are going to be a really cool change in computer software. Where today we're very used to the model of using the mouse. Like, I want to do something, I have to find the menu, gotta click the buttons. I have to remember this sequence of buttons to click in order to do this thing. It kind of feels like Harry Potter, where really I feel like it should
the magic wand.
Yeah, but it really is. Like, you might not think of it every time, but really, like, you are clicking a series of buttons to perform an action, and it has to be this very specific sequence, because any other sequence would do something else and potentially break things, right? So it's really, like that is a model that we kind of got used to, and that's how computer software has been for a long time. I think that one of the things that will come out of all this LLM stuff is a beginning for a new interface where you can speak to the computer in a limited sense, and it will do those actions for you. Like, hey, I want to update the passwords on these 100 cameras. Can you do it for me? And it will understand what that means and do it for you, rather than you remembering, I have to click there, this menu, these buttons, that's a pretty cool thing. However, as anybody who's played with it knows, the computer doesn't always quite understand what you're saying or interpret what you're saying correctly. And so I think one of the skills that has already been or become one of those things is this new job title called prompt engineering, which is the skill of knowing how to whisper to the computer rather than, remembering all the series of clicks. But I think that, that might be a temporary thing, where it's just, right now in version whatever we're on, we need that, and maybe in a couple of years from now, it's just going to be that much smarter. It won't need that. I'll say I don't think so, and I think that at least in the medium term is going to be important, where you'll kind of need to know how to talk to the computer. And I think that's going to be a very interesting skill for technical people to learn. How should I talk to the computer so it's clear, but it's not quite computer programming as formal as Python, but it's not clicking around anymore. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
I love that. That was great. Thank you. I when you mentioned prompt, it's like, really, to me, it's like it's the same thing as talking to people. Like, if I give them an ambiguous thing, they're going to give me something back that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
But if I'm like very specific and clear and concise and precise with my language, then all of a sudden I'm going to get back something that is more of what I want. So it's just teaching people to communicate better, I think.
Not so formally as computer programming, which is a skill, in its own right. But also, I would say, kind of the 1.0 version of interacting with the computer. Because, there's been a large evolution. I mean, we went from literally ones and zeros to if you look at Python, it reads like English. So, there's a lot that has already happened that makes it easier for you to read computer code, but it's still very precise. It's a lot more precise than what you're used to. So having a computer you can have a conversation with, that together you can figure out what you want to do, is a kind of a cool concept that I think as those kind of interfaces happen or start getting more developed, that we'll see that become kind of a new way that people are using the computer.
I think I'd love to have you on in the future to talk about future tense and whenever you're interested. Obviously, this session was a talk about upskilling with AI, so we'll probably have a lot of people to say, how do I get better in this age of everything that's happening, right? Because people want to be relevant in the next 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years, right? And I think the ability to get better with this is such a great opportunity. So thank you, Daniel. So we're at that time of the podcast where you will tell the audience something about that you're working on, that you're excited about, and also where they can find you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm the CEO of Ai-RGUS. We are a software for security camera maintenance, and specifically automating all aspects of it so that you can be sure that the camera evidence you hope to have will actually be there when you need it. So gone should be the days of, there was an incident, let me log into the NVR, oops, the cameras haven't been recording in 2 months. That's exactly the scenario we're trying to avoid. The scenario of I needed the evidence and the camera was blurry because no one's cleaned it in 6 months or a year. Our software detects all kinds of operational problems with the security cameras. It detects cybersecurity issues, tells you if your cameras are down, of course, tells you if the camera is not looking where it should or not recording. And behind me is some of the integrations we have. Our website is more detailed about it, but I'm very excited about the new verticals that we are getting to test our AI on, and we have we've grown a lot. So we start off by doing Duke University, but we do verticals as varied as cannabis, critical infrastructure. We do cities, we do jails, we do small, medium business, car dealerships. I mean, really a lot of different things. So, a lot of data for our AI to see and learn from. Just excited to bring that possibility to users where they buy so much money on a security camera system and they expect that they'll have the footage. And with our software, our users can be confident that they'll actually have that evidence if and when they need it.
Awesome. Thank you. And where can the audience find you?
On LinkedIn, definitely, both on either my personal page or we also have a company page. Either way, happy to talk about any of the things that I talked about today. And I love talking about AI, so I really appreciate, the opportunity to talk about this, and especially in physical security. I think a lot of people stand to benefit from learning about this stuff and considering using this stuff, and we can all learn from each other. It's always interesting to hear people's feedback on why they use it, why they don't use it, what might scare them about them, what previous bad experiences they've had, because unfortunately there's a lot of those too. So, always interested in hearing people's experiences on this stuff.
Hey, drop.